Breaking news out of the NFL, the Indianapolis Colts are trading quarterback Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders for a package including mid-round draft picks. That's been confirmed by our NFL insider Jonathan Jones. Wentz now moves to the NFC East, where he will face the Eagles, the team that drafted him second overall in 2016. He'll see them twice a season. Now, the deal comes almost a year to the day when Philly sent him to Indy. Wentz faltered down the stretch in his lone season for Indy, culminating in a loss to the lowly Jaguars in Week 18 that kept the Colts out of the playoffs. And for more on this, let's welcome in the man who confirmed the news, our senior NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. JJ, your reaction to this news as Wentz is now a Commander.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, the Washington then football team, now Commanders, if you go back to last year, they were trying to get that franchise quarterback. They had looked at Matthew Stafford and were very quickly priced out of the range for him. You go into this offseason, and really the Washington Commanders made no hiding the fact that they were very, very interested in bringing Russell Wilson back to Virginia, where he played high school ball. And Russell Wilson very clearly, very obviously said no to that. But, hey, I want to go play in the altitude in Denver. And so now he's out of Seattle. And so the Washington Commanders essentially looked at some game theory here. And it was, all right, do we continue trying for guys that we're ultimately going to miss out on, or do we pull the trigger on a guy that we feel good about? And the person that they feel good about is a guy that the Indianapolis Colts feel very poorly about, and that is Carson Wentz, a guy who, Jeremy, you talked about it. You look at those total numbers, certainly the touchdowns-interception ratio was very good last year, but he just absolutely fell off a cliff there at the end of the season. And all they had to do was beat the lowly Jaguars there in the final game of the season, and he could not do it. They could not do it, based in large part off of his terrible play. And frankly, that's the reason why he's out from the Indianapolis Colts. Had they won that game, had they gone to the playoffs, and maybe, he laid an egg in the playoffs, it's a very clear possibility that he'd still be with the Colts, especially considering they gave up a first-round pick in order to obtain him from the Philadelphia Eagles. But because a team that had, I think, 7 Pro Bowlers but didn't make the playoffs, the most of any team that didn't make the playoffs, Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, the general manager, made no mistake about it that they wanted out from that contract. They were as honest as they could be after the season in press conferences, certainly last week in Indianapolis at the Combine, and speaking with reporters, it was a fait accompli that he would not be with the Colts again. It was just a matter of where he would be, who would ultimately trade for him, or would they cut him? And so now the report is that the Washington Commanders are going to be taking all of his salary, some around $28 or so million for this upcoming season, but none of that is guaranteed after this season. So, like I said, some mid-round picks in order to get Carson Wentz and all of his salary this year, and then we'll see beyond that.
In terms of what's around him now, when you look at the Commanders in terms of that roster, it's not a terrible roster. They have the 11th overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Ryan Wilson's latest draft has them taking Garrett Wilson, who's obviously one of the top receivers out there. In terms of the pieces that are now around Wentz going from the Colts to the Commanders, what does that look like in your opinion?
Yeah, it looks okay, and I know that the Washington Commanders have felt pretty good about their roster. They have felt that, all right, we're a quarterback away, more or less. Maybe not from competing for a Super Bowl, but we're talking about winning the NFC East and winning a playoff game or two. And that's the sort of the process that they were, the model that they were planning to follow. You go back to last year. This is a Washington team that very well could have drafted Justin Fields if they wanted to spend the ammunition to move up a little bit and get Justin Fields. They said, you know what? Let's go ahead and build the best team possible. Let's ride it out with a veteran quarterback. At the time, it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's build off of that sort of surprisingly overachieving season in 2020. And of course, it was a disappointing 2021 season where Fitzpatrick went down very early with a hip injury. They had to turn to Taylor Heineke, who, if that's your backup quarterback, you feel pretty good about your number 2 backup quarterback. If this is the guy that week in, week out is going to be taking the field and stepping under center on Sundays, you don't love that. And he played well at times. He played above average at times, but a lot of times he just looked like a backup quarterback out there. They have wanted to upgrade here at the quarterback position. This is not a team, considering everything that's going on with ownership, with the multiple investigations going on with this franchise, that could even effort a trade for Deshaun Watson and everything that's going on with him. So they were never in those sweepstakes, never would have been in the sweepstakes, if you want to call it that, for Deshaun Watson. And so their sort of lane was a Carson Wentz, maybe a Jimmy Garoppolo, another veteran quarterback who may ultimately become available via a trade. But where it relates to Carson Wentz, they believe, just like the Colts believed, that they can take Wentz and that they can work out the kinks, that they can fix him. The only part to that is Frank Reich, who had known Carson Wentz, the guy that Carson Wentz wanted to go play for, because Chicago was in the mix for Carson Wentz, and he chose Indianapolis because of Frank Reich. They couldn't work it out, and Frank Reich disposed of him after a year. And so if it didn't work there, is it really going to work somewhere else? Of course, he still shows plenty of those flashes. So anytime you have potential, that will whet the appetite and make plenty of NFL teams salivate.
Our senior NFL insider Jonathan Jones joining us to discuss Carson Wentz being traded to the Washington Commanders. Thanks, JJ. And of course, they'll be talking about this, BMAC and Pat P on the All Things Covered podcast that you can download and follow the podcast wherever you get your preferred audio. You can also watch the fellas on YouTube.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.